Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into something pretty unique, I have to say. It's a text called the Vampire Predator Bible, which is copyrighted by the Temple of the Vampire.
Yeah, definitely not our usual kind of source material.
Right. And you hear vampire and, your mind probably jumps to, well, certain images. But the excerpts our listener sent over, they're actually surprisingly focused
Focused on what exactly?
on things like self-awareness, personal energy, how we actually go about achieving our goals. It's different.
So our mission here basically is to unpack some of these core ideas, see what's maybe thought-provoking or relevant for the listener who shared it.
Exactly. See what resonates, maybe sparks a different way of thinking about things.
Okay. It certainly caught my interest, that emphasis on personal agency. But through this, well, vampiric lens, it's unusual.
It really is. Makes you wonder if there are underlying principles that kind of transcend the whole vampire metaphor.
Absolutely. Where should we start?
Okay, so let's dive into the first section they lay out, sealing the astral. It kicks off right away with this concept of life force.
Life force. How do they describe it?
They call it an electric fire, sort of fueled by something called the inward breath. And they compare the human body to both an electrical battery and our physical form.
A battery. That's a tangible metaphor.
Huh?
So managing your energy reserves?
Pretty much. And they mention this historical interest in it, people trying to understand and even direct this life force. They bring up a guy named Peter Bogatz Otvas.
Oh, yeah. What about him?
Apparently he observed that most people only use a tiny fraction of their life essence, he called it.
That idea of untapped potential isn't unique to this text, is it? You hear echoes of that in psychology, performance coaching.
True. But the text here then points to specific figures like William Gladstone, Edwin Booth, Henry Ward Beecher, suggesting they somehow knew how to direct this energy.
Interesting. Any specific techniques mentioned?
Well, it nods towards, Tantra yogical practices from India, Polynesian traditions, and it draws this parallel between a battery's positive and negative poles and our spinal column.
Okay, so trying to ground it in something physical, or at least analogous.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really practical, I think. They stress that conserving this gathered life force is crucial. You don't want to waste it.
How do they say we waste it?
Undirected emotions, things like worry, depression, pessimism.
Oh.
They say these are major drains on your battery, basically.
That makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? We all know that feeling of being completely wiped out by stress or negative feelings.
Totally. It's like an energetic explanation for emotional exhaustion.
So, conserving energy is step one. What's next for sealing the astral?
It moves into something called nervous control. This is about minimizing wasted physical energy.
Like what kind of energy?
Automatic stuff.
Yeah.
Fidgeting, tapping your foot, even talking too fast. They advocate for, slow, deliberate speech and movement.
Stillness, essentially.
Exactly. They even use Churchill and FDR as examples of this kind of powerful stillness.
Okay, I can picture that. There's a certain presence that comes with being still and deliberate.
Right. And they connect clear, slower speech
Right.
to supporting your breath, which then influences how confident or truthful people perceive you to be.
That's an interesting link between physiology, perception, and this life force idea.
It is. And it keeps going. They mentioned that expressing chronic irritability is another leak. And holding on to self-defeating beliefs. It's almost like managing your whole state of being.
Like an energy audit of your habits and thoughts.
Kind of. Then there's this principle. Slow down and plan ahead. They frame it as a predatory attribute,
Predatory? How so?
contrasting it with how rushed most people are. They use a lion analogy, how it moves deliberately, conserves energy, waits for the right moment.
Okay, setting aside the predator label for a second, the underlying advice, be deliberate, plan, don't rush. That's solid advice in almost any context.
Absolutely. It's strategic thinking, really.
So how do they suggest practicing this control and stillness?
They introduce specific exercises called dead stillness. There's sitting still and standing still.
Dead stillness sounds intense.
The instructions are very precise, specific postures, staying motionless for increasing amounts of time. The goal seems to be feeling and controlling this flow of life force.
Like a form of meditation maybe, but focused on this specific energy concept.
Yeah. And they mentioned something pretty out there, the possibility of seeing a bluish glow over your skin during these exercises.
A bluish glow. Okay, that definitely stands out. Pushing into territory beyond typical sensory experience there.
For sure. But maybe the point is just achieving extreme focus and awareness of subtle sensations, and that's how they interpret it.
Possibly. Cultivating internal awareness is common in many practices. The interpretation is unique here.
Okay, so we've sealed the astral, theoretically. Next up is extending the astral.
Extending it, like projecting it outwards.
Seems so. It starts with vampirism by sight, the idea that life force can be influenced through the eye, the windows of the soul, as they put it.
The eyes as conduits of energy or intention. That's a recurring theme in folklore and mysticism, isn't it?
Definitely. They quote something called the Shiryu Kishu, saying the blood is the life, linking it back to ancient ideas about the physical body being animated by this astral energy.
Right, connecting the physical vitality, blood, with this more subtle energy, astral.
Then it mentions vampirism using touch, how physical contact can impact the victim's astral body, maybe draw out life force. And it talks about higher mysteries connecting different realms. It's all very interconnected.
It presents a model where physical and non-physical realms are deeply intertwined and influence each other.
So this vampirism of sight, how does it supposedly work?
According to the text, it requires focused will and understanding these astral dynamics. And get this, it could potentially lead to influencing physical matter at a distance.
Whoa, okay. That's a big claim, influencing matter.
A very big claim. But then they immediately identify the biggest barrier to doing this.
Which
The belief in separation. The belief that the material world is all there is and that we're all separate entities. For the vampire in this system, space is basically an illusion.
There's a radical perspective shift, saying space isn't real, effectively.
It aligns with certain mystical or philosophical viewpoints, the idea that perceived reality is a construct or illusion. Here, overcoming that belief is key to extending this astral influence.
So our everyday senses, touch, smell, sight, hearing, they're reinforcing this illusion of separation.
That's exactly what they argue. Our senses ground us in this feeling of being separate physical beings in a solid world.
Okay, so how do they suggest you overcome that? More exercise?
Yep. For vampirism by sight, they suggest practicing constant awareness of, like, touching the world with your eyes. Not just seeing, but actively contacting.
Touching with your eyes. Interesting phrasing.
And a more intense version of that dead stillness exercise, plus something called the eye of the dragon.
The eye of the dragon.
Yeah, it involves focusing intently with just one eye, trying to consciously remove the sensation of space between you and what you're looking at.
These sound like deep concentration and perception-altering practices, trying to break down the usual way we experience the world.
Precisely. The goal seems to be shifting perception from a separate self and a physical world to an interconnected energy field.
All right, so after sealing and extending comes seizing the astral.
Seizing it. Sounds active.
It builds on the sight and touch concepts, then introduces vampirism by sympathetic contact.
Sympathetic contact, like using an object.
Exactly. The idea is you can create an astral link, like an energy connection, to someone just by being near them or, more interestingly, by touching something that belongs to them.
Ah, the old idea of an object holding someone's energy or essence, like a lock of hair in folklore.
Or a wedding ring, or clothes they wear a lot. They say the more physical connection someone has with an object, the stronger the astral link.
So objects as conduits make sense within their framework. How do you use it according to them?
It sounds almost simple. Touch or hold the item, focus that inward breath we talked about earlier, and intend to draw life force through that connection.
Intention is key again. Focused will directed through the object.
Yeah. And then they loop back to the sight vampirism, saying that at advanced levels, distance doesn't matter. Astral connections get compressed, allowing energy transfer across huge distances.
So overcoming perceived physical limitations like space entirely.
Seems to be the ultimate goal there. They also mention using magical formulas in sympathetic vampirism to seize and direct the life force.
Formulas like incantations or specific mental constructs.
It doesn't detail them in the excerpts we have, but it mentions them. But then, and this seems really important,
What's that?
a very explicit warning. It says not to undertake any actions during vampirism or their sacred rites that could cause harm or break the law.
Ah, so setting clear boundaries.
Very clear. It states that killing is totally unnecessary, contradicts the intentions of their undead gods, and would lead to immediate expulsion and being reported to authorities.
That's crucial context. It strongly suggests the seizing is meant to be purely on an energetic or psychic level, not physical harm. It reframes the predator aspect significantly.
Definitely. It clarifies the nature of the interaction they're describing. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. The next major section is the use of reason in vampirism.
Reason. Interesting pivot after all the astral talk.
Right. It starts with, quote, hammering home the importance of reason, warning against belief without reason.
A foundation of rationality.
Seems so. They talk about the human tendency to avoid hard thinking,
Huh.
preferring easy distractions, TV, gossip, substances.
That's a critique you hear a lot in modern society, the avoidance of deep thought.
Yeah. And they even suggest that society and certain industries kind of discourage independent thought, which is a fairly bold claim.
Pushing back against passive consumption of information, maybe?
Could be. They list the hurdles: laziness, thinking being perceived as difficult, procrastination, all pretty relatable struggles, I think.
Absolutely. Inertia is powerful.
Yeah. And they talk about how we can be conditioned not to think critically by media, maybe even education systems, or just relying too much on authority figures.
The argument from authority fallacy, believing something just because someone important said it.
Exactly. Trusting someone just because they're on TV or have a title without checking the facts or logic yourself. They argue true understanding needs reason and validation.
And how do they position faith in this?
As the opposite of knowledge when it comes to facts. They say the vampire questions everything, doubts unless reason can confirm it. It's fundamentally skeptical.
A strong rationalist stance, prioritizing empirical evidence and logical consistency.
Then they identify the biggest roadblocks to thinking clearly.
Let me guess.
Emotions.
You got it. Emotion, and also just the comfort of sticking with familiar beliefs, even if they're wrong.
Confirmation bias and emotional reasoning, major cognitive biases.
Totally. And they specifically warn against mystical insights that you can't explain rationally. They call those delusions.
Oh, strong words. So no room for pure intuition or revelation in this system. Apparently not if it can't be backed by reason. They argue genuine knowledge of reality needs to be non-contradictory, and something multiple conscious beings can agree on based on logic.
Intersubjective agreement through reason.
Right. Experience alone isn't enough. They use the dream example. You experience a dream vividly, but that doesn't make it objectively real unless others can verify it through reason.
The classic distinction between subjective experience and objective reality.
So they conclude this bit by saying anyone claiming higher knowledge without a rational basis is essentially intellectually bankrupt. True understanding for them is built purely on reason and logic.
It's a very clear, very demanding intellectual standard they're setting for their practitioner.
Definitely. Okay, from reason, we move to the final big concept, the vampiric will.
Willpower, another core theme. How do they define it?
As the ability to choose and do something, even when there are obstacles. Simple but powerful. And they contrast it with what they see as a kind of weak, fuzzy idea of willpower most people have.
Setting their definition apart, making it sound more active, maybe more potent.
Could be. They give examples. Someone quitting smoking, losing weight, surviving something incredibly difficult. That demonstrates will.
Concrete examples of overcoming challenges.
And they frame it as a formula almost. Your desires, then obstacles, leading to fulfillment. The will is what bridges the gap, overcoming the obstacles.
So problem solving is inherent in will. Now, how to get past the roadblock.
Exactly. They contrast people who just hope for luck or help from others versus those who apply their will to make things happen.
Taking personal responsibility for outcomes.
Right. And they don't shy away from the fact that it often involves discomfort or effort. Another formula. Your desires, then pain or work, leading to fulfillment.
Acknowledging the cost or effort involved, like
Yeah.
the pain of nicotine withdrawal or the work of diet and exercise.
Precisely. It's about pushing through that necessary difficulty.
And how does the vampiric perspective approach these problems?
Objectively, they say. No self-pity, no blaming others. Just analyze the problem and apply will.
A detached, analytical approach to challenges.
Then they introduce a core concept for this. The de-identification process.
So identification, what's that about?
They present it as fundamental for using the will to overcome any obstacle. It involves breaking down old identities or limitations.
How so? Any examples?
Military basic training is the analogy they use. How it breaks down the civilian identity and builds a new one focused on obedience, discipline, pushing past perceived physical limits.
Ah, so deliberately dismantling limiting self-concepts to build a stronger, more focused will.
That seems to be the idea, stripping away the I can't beliefs.
And this will, is it innate or developed?
Developed.
Yeah.
They emphasize it's strengthened through conscious exercise by deliberately confronting discomfort and challenges.
Like a muscle that gets stronger with use.
Exactly. And then they turn it back on the listener, asking you directly, How well do you understand your own will? How do you apply it? It's meant to make you reflect.
A call to self-examination.
Yeah. They explain that this vampiric will comes from a core sense of self, making sure your actions truly align with your deepest desires and goals.
Authenticity and alignment being key to powerful will.
Right. And just at the end, they briefly mention two advanced techniques: walking the world, or WTW, and going behind the eyes, GBTE.
WTW and GPTE, what are those briefly?
WTW sounds like remembering a moment so completely, so vividly that you are effectively there again. Total recall immersion.
Wow, like mentally time traveling through focused memory.
Kind of seems like it.
Mm.
And GBTE is described as experiencing an altered state of consciousness related to perception and will.
So deeper levels of mental control and awareness tied into this concept of will.
Yeah, hints of more advanced practices. So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground from the Vampire Predator Bible
We really have, from life force and sealing the astral,
to extending and seizing it through sight, touch, sympathy.
with that crucial emphasis on ethical boundaries despite the terminology.
Absolutely. Then the heavy focus on reason as the ultimate judge of reality.
Contrasting it sharply with faith or unexplained intuition.
And finally, the cultivation of this focused, objective, and powerful vampiric will through identification and conscious effort.
It's fascinating how these themes, energy management, critical thinking, focused, intention, willpower, are explored through such a unique and, let's face it, provocative lens.
It really is. The terminology, the framework, it's definitely different. But some of the underlying ideas about self-mastery might resonate, even outside this specific context.
Definitely gives you a different angle to think about those things.
So for you, the listener, reflecting on all this, maybe think about this. Considering these ideas about energy, focused thought, and intentional will, is there maybe one area in your life where applying your will more consciously, or perhaps examining your core beliefs more rationally, might lead to a different outcome?
A powerful question to ponder. How could a shift in perspective or a more focused application of intention change things for you?
Exactly. Something to mull over. If any of this sparked your interest, you might want to reflect further, maybe even look more into the source material itself.
Thanks for joining us on this rather unusual deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.